One of the things that we work a lot with is communication. And everything we know about communication and how we communicate with each other really doesn't work when a person has dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever you want to say, because logic doesn't work anymore. And we tend to communicate in a logical way. And so I actually think artists and musicians and people like me that tune into feelings do very well with that, because we sense, we pick up, and we validate. A lot of people think it's a memory problem, but when the brain fails, the whole body is affected, and it is a terminal disease. So many times in our support groups, we talk about that right up front. It is a terminal disease, and it has a progression. And level 6, if you're dealing with groups where people are advancing, that's when you're going to get the hallucinations and the delusions. A delusion is a fixed false belief. You're not going to convince the person, that, for example, they may be very paranoid. They may think somebody out there is watching them, or they might think that you're against them, or they might have food issues. They may think that you put something in the drink and they're not going to touch it. Those are the kind of things that you're going to see with that. Hallucination is they're actually seeing, hearing, feeling somebody. That they see somebody coming over there and they have a knife and they're going to stab me. Or I took care of a guy that snakes were coming out of the waste paper basket, and I'm scared to death of snakes. That would be horrible for me. You know what I mean? So it can be different things.
The main thing to realize is dementia attacks the brain asymmetrically. So left in language and logic over here, right? And rhythm on the right side. The right side is usually the last thing intact, which is why the music and the rhythm and dancing, there's people that can't speak anymore, but they can hum their song, their favorite songs from when they were 14.
That's right. And the music thing, when I worked in the nursing home, I worked in Virginia, and I had a lot of African American women, and we formed our own kind of Southern gospel music. And we actually, when people were dying, we surrounded the bed and we held each other's hands, and we did some of those old music. You could see, sometimes they'd have a machine on their finger to say what the oxygen level was. And as we were holding hands and singing, the oxygen level would actually raise. Oh. And so you could see the evidence based on the music and the response. So definitely use that music.
We've had people in our groups that wouldn't, who I'm thinking, he wouldn't talk for like the first 3 weeks that he came, and we do a piece where we sing for like 15 minutes, and all of a sudden one day we looked up and he was singing, and then the next class he was just full on talking and getting involved in the conversations, and it really does wake up the soul.
I felt like I gained a deeper perspective and more understanding about Alzheimer's and dementia, and that is allowing me to be more connected and look at my work, listening to people's narratives and life stories, and writing songs from there in a more empathetic way.
I'm just super excited to think that I can do art with people in a different way than I've been doing it, and I'm looking forward to it.
We see a lot with people living with dementia. Their family is so focused on keeping them alive, right? The safety things and what they need. We forget about the human part, that they need to be alive while they're alive. Like, how can we actually let them live still? Because that's the common misconception is you get a diagnosis and now everything's just over. And that's not the case. I mean, it is a terminal illness. It's a cause of death that goes on death certificates, but there is still so much left. But we don't want to focus on what they've lost. We want to focus on what's still there, because there is a lot still there. And if they can't have a conversation, and if they're maybe not able to, respond to what you're saying, the emotion is still there. They still feel that. And the sense of touch is really, really underrated. I might not be able to I couldn't have a conversation with my grandmother at the end, but I could hold her hand and she knew that I was there. And she felt the support. And she didn't necessarily remember I was her granddaughter. She had no idea who I was, but I made her feel like a human that deserved quality of life.
Yeah, I really enjoyed just kind of the reinforcement idea that and learning more ways of why health or arts can be really healing. And also, I'm really interested in the process of the creative process and also the grief process and how those tie together and how the grief can be worked through the creative process.
Having dealt with Alzheimer's with my parents, I felt like a lot of emotional issues came up for me just listening to all of this. And it made me sort of thinking about art as a process. I'm thinking about life as a process too, and that this end of life sort of feeling, and there's so much loss at the end of our lives. And I love the idea of being able to give out of who I am as a person to people who are still there. They've lost a lot of who they are, but they're still there. And I love the idea about connecting with that. The who I am connecting with who they are through art and poetry and music.
I mean, when I say flexibility is key, I think that's a really important thing. You can prepare something, you know, that you would normally do, and just know that when you get in there, you might need to take a few steps out of it, or just, you know, if they just want to do their own thing and not anything about what you're doing, you know, they just like to be stimulated.
Yeah, and
That's the biggest thing.
Actually, that's what I'm thinking, that everyone here would be so wonderful with the people because you get it. And just by your presence and introducing that they can do something like this, I think is affirming. That's kind of my read on it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You know, it's not about performance, it's the fact that you're going to be there. And that's also because you don't want a person to feel helpless. They can be helpful by giving this to their loved one. They don't want to always be in a position of receiving. They want to give. And you're providing that opportunity.
Watching them walk out when their loved ones come to pick them up, saying, "Look what I did." I mean, the beaming on it's just, so if it doesn't look anything like what you were trying to teach,
Doesn't matter.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's why the point of this is offering them the outlet for creativity and for fellowship, and approaching it as that this is not for them to create a masterpiece and go home with. You know, it's about the art, but it's a lot deeper than that. It's for that sense of purpose and that activity and that stimulation. So if you come in with something and you find that nobody was actually able to produce that quality necessarily, and really approaching it that way, like we're here to just be with each other and to channel energy, and you know, we want to do things to prove to ourselves that things are possible. We want to show their loved ones that they can do this, and sometimes that gets in the way of just letting the magic of it happen. So really keeping that in mind. It's not about the piece of art. It's not about, you know, them being able to give somebody something. It's in that moment, that hour that they're with you, that you're making them feel alive and sense of purpose. So I'm glad you said that.
For me, it was the incredible diversity of arts here that is available to this program, and how many different ways that we can help people with dementia and their caregivers. I think art is the ultimate in healing in so many ways, not just visual art, but music, poetry, clay, puppetry, all of those things give people a deeper connection that they would normally have.
Mirroring, I think is really important, and that's probably how you're going to do that when you do your class, is you're going to be the example. You know, you're going to pick up, if it's a brush or if you're working with clay, or I'm not sure, poetry or whatever. You actually mirror, and that helps the person actually perform. And so I think just the fact of using your words plus your physical being will make a big difference. You will find when you get with this group, the other members in the group want to be helpful as well. We have found that, like, if somebody gets stuck in a group and they're having trouble, the other one will pick up on it. And you'll see a beautiful community evolve as you stay with the group. And they have a trust built with you. I think that's very important.
Yeah, they might not remember each other's names. We have name tags on the table, so everybody can just look down and there's no guesswork. But they know each other, even if they don't. And they've said it, I don't remember your name, but I know that I like you and you make me laugh.
As I was learning about dementia, I realized how many people I actually have in my life that are affected or could be affected by it. And so I felt a little intimidated, and then I kind of felt excited because I realized that a lot of the skills that I already have learned as a teaching artist could easily be applied here, and it's not as scary. The subject of dementia is actually not quite as scary, especially if I get to do some workshops with it. It's just something I can embrace as part of our reality and take away stigma a little bit.
So one piece before we go into too much more is the veteran piece. So I served in the Army, and so I have kind of a heart for veterans. And there's a huge correlation between veterans and dementia. So a veteran is twice as likely than a civilian to develop some kind of dementia. Now, let me preface this. If you or you know somebody is any of these things I'm about to list, it does not mean you're destined to get dementia, okay? Like, it's not going to happen to you. It just raises your chances a little bit. So you're twice as likely than a civilian. If you were in the Vietnam War, you're twice as likely, even more. You know, Agent Orange, PTSD, all of that raises it even more. The problem is because the short term is the first thing to go, a lot of times anyone with trauma, you've got unresolved issues. So a lot of times when you see somebody with dementia being challenging, it's because those unresolved issues are in the forefront. They might not be able to articulate it, they think that they're there. So we've had instances where somebody's spouse thought he was in the middle of a war zone in the middle of the night. And if you come across somebody like that and you approach them the wrong way, how do you think that's gonna go? We see a lot of social isolation with dementia, but especially with veterans that might be experiencing PTSD in general. So it's really important to try to find ways to get them out of their shell, to find joy in their life, to have them around other people. And because unfortunately we're in that phase right now where all these Vietnam vets are starting to develop this, there's a lot of people aren't asking for help. There's already a stigma with PTSD, especially those Vietnam vets. You know, a lot of them were not received well, so they carry that with them. They already don't want to ask for help. And now, a lot of the spouses might become a little intimidated by them because if these people are aggressive, that's an issue.
I found this session to be very informative. It brings to mind that as the boomers are getting, the whole aging thing is happening, and this is a very relevant subject. The things that I especially found useful are the different types of dementia. I didn't realize there were so many kinds, and the levels of dementia, being able to recognize those aspects and how to deal with those things. We're talking about vision and surprise and the ways to feel somebody, make them feel important as they slip into dementia. And lastly, it empowered me as an artist to know that art is an important thing, not just for kids and adults, but especially for people with dementia. So made me feel empowered.
So when you're little, you can see your fingers right out here. As you age, so everyone go like this. Start out here. Now move in until you can see your fingertips. So now move them in a little bit more because now you have a dementia diagnosis. Now you can't see as far. So right out in front of you, this is what somebody that's in the throes of dementia can see typically. Because vision is affected. You've got tunnel vision. So it starts off with a little bit of the outer line being a little bit of a blur, and then it turns into a scuba mask. So everybody do this. Okay, so now I can't see Kelly, can't see Leslie, can see your elbow over there. So if Kelly's talking to me, I don't know if she's talking to me. Might not know who it is. Okay, so I'm not gonna walk up to Leslie from here and ask her to grab her paintbrush because she might think I'm talking to somebody else. So I'm going to get in front of Leslie. But here's the other thing. This is very confrontational, right? Because, here, you stand like this. Because right now, I'm coming at you, and if you want to walk away, and there's a wall behind you, that's not a very supportive stance, right? So this is the supportive stance. So she's got a way to get out. I'm not blocking her in anywhere if she's uncomfortable. So now you can't see, you can't necessarily hear, but you feel footsteps coming at you really quickly. We need to be careful that we're approaching slowly, and we're gonna state our intent before we do it. And as it goes on, it turns into binoculars, so even smaller.
What I love about teaching art is taking people backstage at the play. It's one thing to sit in the front row and passively observe it, but to get to go backstage on the making of art is a pretty powerful thing. And I love that I'm getting to learn from people of all walks, and this is an incredible privilege for me. That's the takeaway, is that I'll get to have that exchange.
Here's the thing with dementia. They're constantly losing pieces of themselves, and they're aware of it or they're not aware of it. And that's a hard thing to deal with, especially if you were the one who always did the driving, if you were the one who was in charge of the bills, if you were the one that did this. So admitting that to yourself and then also admitting it out loud can be really difficult. And let's be honest, it puts a burden on the caregiver because now they have to drive this person everywhere or they have to arrange driving. So it's not the easiest thing to get rid of. No one's willing to go in and say, okay, here's my keys, I'm all done. And if they do say that, here's the thing. We see this a lot. They're agreeable. They hand over the keys. They know in that moment they shouldn't drive anymore. Next week, they don't remember that conversation and they're pissed because you took my keys. I am fine. Are you the one with a problem? Because I'm okay. I just drove to the store yesterday. When really, they might not have driven for 6 years. So we always just say, take the keys and the car completely out of the situation. You know, the car is at the shop. And you know what? I don't know why it's still there. I'm going to call those people right now and give them a piece of my mind, and then you change the subject. So you've got to be creative because it's not just about you and your loved one. It's also that person on the street that could possibly be at risk.
If you're a caregiver, that increases your risk of dementia. We see a lot of caregivers in our group end up with major problems and some dying prior to the person they're taking care of.
40% of the time that will happen because they're neglecting themselves to take care of their person. A lot of them get dropped off by their caregiver, and they're gonna probably wanna come say hi and, you know, just that quick interaction. And one philosophy that we have in our office is they are allowed to be as stressed out and as short as they want to be because they are dealing with a lot. So a lot of the times the caregiver is not really thought of. I call them the invisible patient because they are dealing with just as much, if not more. And we really need to keep that in mind. The stress level is there. You told me this when I first started and it stuck with me. If a caregiver gets a cut and somebody living with dementia gets it, the caregiver is going to take twice as long to heal because that stress is physically manifested in their body. So just keep that in mind when the caregivers come. You are helping them heal as much as their person living with dementia, even in that quick handshake.